Fellow podcaster and RadioHub founder Cooper Silk recently attended Podcast Movement, which is the world's biggest podcasting conference. And he's here to share what best practice podcasting looks like in 2020 and beyond. It's a very podcasty episode 479 of the award-winning Small Business Big Marketing podcast.
Well, I said, welcome to a small business marketing show where successful small business owners share their souls to take your marketing straight to the lead. Now, here's your host, Mr. Timbo Reid.
And welcome back to your weekly dose of marketing melodrama. I'm your host, Timbo Reid. You, infinitely more importantly, you're a motivated business owner, ready to crank out some great marketing to build that beautiful business of yours into the empire it deserves to be. And that's exactly what we do around here, guys. Plus, you can join our free Facebook group for some ongoing marketing discussion, accountability, support. You can share your ideas. You can help others. Just get in there. Search for Small Business Big Marketing Tribe on Facebook, and I look forward to seeing you in there. Big episode today. Podcast host and producer Cooper Silk, who recently attended the world's biggest podcast event called Podcast Movement in Orlando, Florida. Well, he comes along to share what he's learnt, and he's learned a lot. This week's Monster Prize Draw winner has implemented ideas from this show, which, how's this, have enabled her to make more money working 4 hours a week than she was when she was working 24 hours a week. And she got those ideas from this show. I want a bit of that. And I'll let you in on next week's guest. As per usual, team, there is marketing GOLD dripping from the ceiling over here at Small Business Big Marketing's HQ. So let's get stuck right in. Quick update on my movements, if you're interested. Not bodily movements, but, like geographical movements. I'm heading to the UK tomorrow. Awesome. Never been there. Going to London. My daughter, my beautiful Stephanie, has taken a gap year and she's on her way home. And I always said I would go and visit her somewhere in the world before she got home. And that happens to be London. So I head there tomorrow. I'm going to have some fun. I have pre-prepared some episodes so, the Small Business Big Marketing machine will keep rolling along. However, I am going to do some interviews over in London. Got some awesome guests lined up. Going to be speaking to a surgeon who has come up with a business idea where he has secured operating theatres in private hospitals to use out of hours on weekends to take the load off the public health system. And he and his colleagues are doing really well from that. I hope to catch up with Damien Lee. You might remember him from a couple of years ago from Mr. Lee's Noodles. Twice cancer survivor, now an instant noodle manufacturer. I hope to get an update on him because I know that business is going from strength to strength or from noodle to noodle. Catch up with a ex-police officer who has become an entrepreneur and is helping other police officers become entrepreneurs. And I'm also going to do a few Airbnb experiences and not accommodation-wise, but like experiences with locals. And I hope to interview a few of them along the way because I love that as a business model. So plenty going on. Off to London, and there will be a few UK interviews with our Pommy entrepreneurial colleagues coming up in the coming weeks. Now, I first met this week's guest over a couple of quiet ones when I was hosting the Australian Podcast Awards last year. And we've hit it off ever since. He's an awesome bloke. I was going to say he's a horse. He's not a horse. He's an awesome bloke. Cooper Silk is the founder and owner of RadioHub, which is a high-end professional podcasting studio set up in Sydney. If you want to get a podcast producer, you want to talk about podcasting and you are in that area, I would have a look at RadioHub. They're awesome. Cooper is also the host of Roosters Radio, which for all you Rugby League fans is a weekly podcast he puts together for his favourite team. But what's even more interesting is he's just back from Podcast Movement in Orlando, Florida, which is the world's biggest podcasting conference. I'm embarrassed I didn't go. He tells us that there's only 6 Aussies there out of 3,000 people. Anyway, I hope to get there next year. So I joined Cooper at RadioHub's Sydney studio where we talked about his top pre- and post-production learnings, why we're lagging behind in podcast production in Australia, how the big guys are building their audiences, why we all need to up our podcasting game, and plenty more podcasting insights. So here's Cooper painting a picture of just how big podcast movement was.
Amazing event, over 3,000 attendees in this huge resort, this huge hotel in the middle of Orlando. And it's, as you drive into it, it's like a castle, and it's got a Arnold Palmer curated golf course out the front. It's got lakes with signs saying beware of the alligators, and then you drive up this ramp, and as I said, it looks like something out of Disney World. Yeah. And you walked in, and straight away, like, there's buses taking you there. So they had 2 hotels full.
Wow,
that's the scale of this thing. And then you walk, onto the down an escalator into the halls. So the big giant halls, and then there it is, podcast movement.
You'd taken over the entire resort,
the whole hotel, and then there was another hotel to service people like me who couldn't afford to stay in the big one.
The tight asses.
Well, the battlers.
Bit of a worry that a handful of Australians, I mean, I'm guilty, I wasn't there,
Yep.
Should have been there, probably go next year.
Yep.
Literally, like, what do you reckon, 10 out of the 3,000 delegates?
Yeah.
Come on, Aussies.
I think I can count probably half a dozen.
Wow. And you met them all?
Pretty much so. There was a couple I missed, but I got to meet the majority of them.
So, Coops, you roll up to this joint, big resort, you've taken it over, there's 3,000 delegates. What are we talking? Is it a big expo with a whole lot of keynote stages around the place?
If you can imagine, like, the Las Vegas trade shows, so you're in a giant hotel in a big open floor, and around it a room. So when you walk into the main theatre part, there was a main stage, and then you walk into another doorway, and that was the showroom floor. And on the showroom floor were all the stalls from all the big companies. So there was tech companies, a lot of hosting companies, and smaller people from all parts of the world as well. And around the floor were different rooms. So there was roughly
open air rooms or closed?
Closed doors. So it was standing room only in the rooms. That's how many people were there. So if there was 8 sessions going on at once, pretty much they were all full. So it's hard to get to every keynote. So a lot of planning. There was actually an event where before the event started, someone would tell you how to navigate it.
Wow!
So it had an app, and you'd pick if it whatever suited you, be it monetization, tech, starting out, industry. There was a heap of different categories, and you'd kind of just cherry pick what suited you and your reason for going there.
What did it give you a sense that this podcasting thing has finally taken off?
Well, I was on debut, so I hadn't been to any of the others, but speaking to people who had been, this was the first time that the big players were there. So Google, Spotify, as I said, some of the big hosting networks, they were all there. And so you could feel there was this sense of corporate takeover or professionalism. And for the independent podcasters like us, it was a little bit daunting.
The bespoke podcasters all of a sudden having to compete with the big guys. And we're seeing that here. I mean, all the big media companies, there's not a radio station that doesn't at the end of one of their shows say, you'll find the playback version or the podcast version over at such and such website. So that's kind of that's interesting in itself. So we are seeing a whole lot of big boys come along, and that kind of raises the bar for people like you and I, and for my audience, business owners who are wanting to create a podcast. Should we be worried?
No. For me, it was a bit of a kick in the pants, and I realised that if you want to compete with the big media companies, you've got to lift your game. We'll probably talk about it later or touch on it later, but having them there and hearing them at the keynotes, you realise we're a long way away. And if you want to...
In Australia?
Correct, yeah. And we're probably a little bit behind, but I think most of us have been in the game long enough kind of know that.
Yeah.
So it's what do you have to do to compete with the big networks?
Just to give a sense of size before we talk about some of your learnings or all of your learnings, how many kind of exhibitors? Are we talking 50?
Rows. Yeah, maybe 50, maybe 30.
Oh, that's not huge. I mean, rows, mate. I mean, I was thinking of some kind of Chinese bloody product fair,
Maybe 10 rows of, say, 10.
Mate, I've told you 8 billion times not to exaggerate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to... Let's say 30.
For you, it was big.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah.
And it was really big. Like there was a petting zoo there, and you get beers.
What is a petting zoo? Where
you
go
small
and
little
kiss?
animals, and you play pet animals, and just stuff like that. I don't know what company was pushing that, but I found the one that was handing out the free beers pretty quickly.
No doubt. Stands like Google. So what are Google doing on their stand?
They
or
had
Spotify?
Spotify had this beautiful suite where there was people talking, about the app. I suppose how you can actually get your podcast onto it. So remember, there's a lot of people who are just starting out podcasting. So, from Google, they had all the different phones, and obviously they've in
Google
recent
Play.
times gone all in as well by way of SEO and searching for podcasts now. So they did a keynote on that. But
Just tell me about that.
I actually didn't go to that discussion, but a lot of the talk...
Is it just me, or that would have been one of the major ones to go to? Like SEO for podcasts?
Well, what happens is, as a member... what happens is you get recordings of all the events afterwards. So I only got that last week. So what I will do is sit down and watch them all.
Okay.
But honestly, there's probably 100 keynotes or 50 keynotes or something like that. So you just can't get to everything.
All right. I want to break it down, and the way we're going to do this in terms of your learnings, and feel free to ask me questions along the way of my learnings, even though I wasn't there. But let's have a good podcast discussion that at the end of this, the listener is going to think, okay, there's some things I've learned that are around best practice in 2019 going into 2020 if I have a podcast or I'm going to start a podcast. I want to break it down into pre-production and then the actual production of the podcast and then post-production, okay? And then we'll just kind of go tick for tack.
Yep.
So pre-production, big aha moments for you, or just learnings where you've kind of kicked yourself and gone, oh, Coops, how'd I miss that?
So I'll take it back a step and probably set the scene by saying what I went there for. So my goal was to have three conversations where I'd take something back that I can implement here at RadioHub. So I want to have three meaningful conversations with either tech companies, marketing, and find out best practice by way of marketing, and find out what the big guys are doing so that we can compete down here in Australia. So from that point, I was lucky enough to speak to some of the big CEOs from the tech companies, be it Blueberry. Met some amazing guys from Squadcast.
You need to say who these people are. Blueberry is a hosting service.
It's a hosting service,
where you upload your media file in order to then get your media player and your analytics and all that kind of stuff. I use Omni.
Yeah, Omni were there as well. Yeah, so they were there.
You could use SoundCloud. You could use...
there was Simplecast. There was Libsyn, Podbean. They were all there.
They're all there.
Wooshka. Rob was there kind of walking around as well. So... all the hosts, and there's some big ones coming out with, there's a company called Himalaya, which is supposed to have had like 100 million pumped into it from venture capital. So there's, a lot of money being thrown into this space. So they were all there, and you got to meet these guys. I also got to meet the creators of Spreaker, which is the first platform that I ever used back in about 2012. Italian guys, they were really cool. And then there was some of the new apps or platforms that are being produced. So many people may or may not have heard of Squadcast. For those that do remote recordings, with their guests via Zoom or Skype, Squadcast is pretty much built for podcasters, and it's a better quality audio. It's a multi-track recording.
So from what I can gather, and the Squadcast hit me up a few months ago, and because I think they're based in New York or something. I just couldn't get LA. I couldn't get the timings right, but I've had a look at it. It looks pretty awesome. Haven't used it. Have you used it?
No, I've locked in a meeting with the guy to have a sit down and get shown how to use it properly.
So, but it is worth understanding what that is. So Squadcast, right now I do most of my remote interviews using Skype, and I use Skype Call Recorder to record. You use Zoom. From what I've seen with Squadcast, you can go, okay, I want to do an interview. You go and open up a file within Squadcast. It gives you a link that I then send to you as my guest who's elsewhere, not with me, in the world somewhere. You open that link and then we can start recording, and then it spits back to us, or to me, the host, a file with split tracks. So it's got you, it's got me. We can edit either side. From what I can tell, the audio quality is primo.
That's its selling point. That's what they're all in. So it's all about having good quality audio, and you can also see your guest. And in their next release, which will be soon, there will be the ability to have the recording of the video as well. It will be like a Skype.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think that's awesome. Awesome functionality, and I'll be having a really good look at Squadcast when it comes out. I like the idea of seeing the guests because you can do that with Skype, although Skype's codec or whatever it is that allows you to do that just doesn't seem good enough. It seems to suck a lot of bandwidth when you've got the video on and trying to talk with someone on Skype. I forgot what I was going to say about Squadcast, except to say that I'm looking forward to using it because I still think no one's cracked the egg on that kind of remote interview technology. I
like the ability to use the video because you can use that as part of your marketing. So for a trailer purpose. I think just a little clip.
Yeah. I mean, Joe Rogan does video.
Yep.
And it's actually pretty good, although I don't sit there and watch the entire 2.5, 3 hour episodes of Joe Rogan on video, but he does it really well on YouTube where he takes 5, 6, 7 minute grabs of a particular question that he asks his guest and cuts them up. That to me, we're talking podcast best practice. That is awesome because it kind of allows you to dip into a show. And then, if you like what you're hearing, obviously go and download the whole episode.
Well, on that point, one of the big discussions was multimedia. So we're in the audio space, but more and more people are starting to use video, live streaming. And I suppose it lends itself to say, well, where's my audience? So if your audience is on YouTube, you may as well use video. Or if they're on Facebook, use Facebook Live. We've been doing a couple of tests since I've come back last week, and I'm seeing some really big numbers when we're doing a stream.
Okay.
Like in the thousands.
So what are you doing?
So
is this for Roosters Radio?
This is for Roosters Radio. So we do the podcast with the Sydney Roosters. Tested this last week, as a matter of fact, or this week, where we had one of the players on the phone, set up the stream, Facebook Live. During the recording of the interview, probably had around 20 to 30 people in real time. Since we've uploaded and shared it, it's in the thousands now. So a couple of thousand, 2,000.
So just again, I'm going to go specific here. You have got a player
at home
remotely. He's on his phone on a Facebook Live with you.
No. So we've called him using the Rode Procaster.
Yes.
So we've got the input or the phone output plugged into a adapter, which is plugged into an iPad.
You want to get any geekier?
Well, this is the thing, right? And then we use an app called Switcher Studio, and that is then broadcast through to Facebook. So we have a Roosters Radio Facebook page.
Yep.
So we're getting the audio quality from the mixer coming straight in via the adapter into the iPad, which is then streaming live.
Geez, that's complicated.
It's actually not. It's actually not.
I guess once you've done it and once you've seen it, I guess people listening, including me, went a little cross-eyed. It'd be fair to say just ever so slightly cross-eyed as you talk. And I guess one of the things for me in podcasting and representing small business owners, I'm so keen. I mean, nothing brings me more joy than a listener saying, I've just started my podcast, Timbo, and I'm loving it and it's working for my business. The problem is some of this stuff that we talk about does feel a little bit complicated. So the more we can do to kind of simplify that, the better.
Well, where do you sit with the video aspect of your podcast?
I don't do a lot of it. I did do one last week. I was down in Byron Bay talking to a fellow Cedar.
Not the surfer?
The surfer? No, he didn't.
He was in Noosa.
He came up to me. No, I went down to Byron Bay, interviewed a fellow Cedar Anderson who created a product called Flow Hive. He disrupted the whole beekeeping industry. We didn't video us. We were in a wardrobe, his beekeeping suit wardrobe. That's where we were recording because it gave the best acoustic. But he was very keen to do a Facebook Live afterwards. And I mean, again, it was me saying, hey, I've just down here in Byron Bay, Cedar Anderson, let's have a look at his invention and have a bit of a chat. And that's certainly that got views in the hundreds. And I would have thought more, but I can understand why I didn't now because it was actually a video about beekeeping and not about podcasting. But I know from my learning, and I think you're going to talk about this, is that audiences really want to engage with the host. Yeah, so anything you can do, either one-on-one or a Facebook Live, one-to-many, to kind of, put yourself out there as a host is probably a good thing.
What about we do one a little bit later? I can set up the stream.
Righto. All right.
Well, so I can show you.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, okay.
We can do that. And the other thing with video for me as a podcaster is I like audio, right? And it's like I've just made a hard decision. I haven't done a whole lot of video over the 10 years that my show's been around. I know when I do it, it's well accepted, but I'm just like, no, I like audio and I'm going to stick to that. And I can imagine next year I have plans to do a little bit more behind the scenes and to take people, and show people stuff that I just kind of take for granted or think is boring, but actual people are interested in seeing.
That's a great point we'll touch on.
Okay, let's just go back to...
But just on Joe Rogan, just quickly.
Joey,
he's the #1 podcaster in the world.
Was he at Podcast Movement?
No, he wasn't. But the fact that he's doing video... Maybe, that explains something.
Maybe it does. I mean, he's got a pretty serious setup. I mean,
It's actually not. It's pretty much 3 cameras. One's a wide shot, one's on him, one's on his guest.
To me, that's a serious setup. Someone's got to edit. Someone's got to take that raw footage and create something from it.
Yeah.
So, not for the faint-hearted. I think it looks good. I mean, the way he has got it set up, it's kind of a balance between high production and just kind of grungy, let's just get this out production, which is a good thing. Pre-production-wise, what else did you learn?
Probably my biggest aha moment was sitting in a keynote, and there's a gentleman by the name of Jordan Harbinger, who's well known in the States. He's been podcasting for a long, long time. And he just went through his process for preparing for an interview. And I was sitting there next to my business partner. I just kind of looked at him and said, mate, we're kidding ourselves.
Right.
Honest to God.
Amateurs.
Just complacent. If I'm being really honest, I think we've just got comfortable and we've got complacent, and we're just used to doing the same thing week in, week out.
Righto.
And that reflects on our customers too.
What's Jordan Harbinger's process for preparing an episode?
Scare me. Well, he's big on really prepping his topic. And so he said it's not, and this is his quote, but it's not good enough to just walk in and start talking. It leads to long rambles. Hand up here, I'm guilty of that. So his process is when he's searching for a guest, he'll go into video, he'll go into LinkedIn, find out something unique about that person, and it really shows that you've done your work. He also talked about scripting. I know some people aren't fans of writing a script. I know you do, I know I do. But just having...
Script for the voiceovers either side of it?
Well, scripting questions as well. Just saying, I want to talk about this. And even to the point where he'll send that to the guest prior to the recording. Not for everyone, but that's what he does. And another big takeaway, if we just go back to remote recording, he actually sends a set of USB headset to the guest and saying, this is what I want you to use. Plug this into your computer. I'm going to test it a day or two out from the interview to make sure we've got the right quality audio, which I think sends a message to the guest that, hey, listen, we're fair income here. And, bring your A game because, that's what we're about.
Has the headset got a mic in it?
Yeah, it's one of those headsets like the call centre, but it's $35 on Amazon. I won't mention the name of it. But
go ahead, mate. Why not?
Well, it's a Sennheiser product. I don't know the serial number of it. Right. It's a Sennheiser headset, and he sends that to every guest that he interviews remotely, just so that the audio quality is up to speed.
And a little gift.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So, okay, let's just talk about that process of pre-production, which is be more planned. Yeah. And I agree. I think there's too many, and I think it's a reason why we see a lot of podcasters drop off at episode 6, 7, 8 because they're not getting traction. Well, mate, you're not getting traction because you haven't put the plan in. You think this is easy. You walk up, I'm going to do interviews. I hear so many people say, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to do a whole lot of interviews. And whilst that sounds relatively easy, the more planning you can put into it, and you and I are both guilty. I mean, we probably could put more planning into it, although there's an element of me that likes the spontaneity of it, and I am a curious person by nature. So planning for me is asking myself, why am I interviewing this person? What am I really curious about? What's the big question that I want answered as a result of interviewing this person? I personally, I will watch videos. I'll try and find videos of the person so I can see what they look like. I'll listen to an audio. I'll look at their social media. I'll look at the About Us page on their website, but they've written that, so that's not that helpful. I'll do a wiki search. I will do a pre-interview. I will always speak to
that's best practice, what you've just said there, Tim. That really is. And read books if they've written them, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can't do that.
No?
I haven't got the attention.
Even if you read 5 chapters.
You don't. There's no way you do.
I skim. Yeah. I skim. That's why I give myself a kick up the butt when I was sitting there.
Don't point your finger at me and go, read the books as is.
We'll get someone to read it for you.
The pre-interview, I find, of all those things,
Yep.
well, you've kind of got to know enough about these people. Of all those things, the pre-interview is the awesome one. You hear their voice.
Yep.
Maybe they have an accent. Maybe they are, some people are verbose and answer way too long. Others just go, yep. No, and then you go, wow, I've got to work hard here. You have the opportunity to talk to them about, how they present themselves on mic, or if they haven't done an interview before. I ask them, I do ask the question, you've done a lot of interviews. What haven't you been asked?
Yeah.
And sometimes I get to their assistant. Some of my guests have assistants, and I say, hey, listen, I did this yesterday. I'm interviewing, how's this? I digress, but I'm interviewing a bloke next week who has bought the rights to the Hollywood sign.
Oh, really?
He's from Adelaide,
Yeah,
and
right.
anyone who wants to use a Hollywood sign has to license it off him. He's been hard to get to, but his EA has been great. And so I said to her, hey, his name's Shane. So what's Shane like? Is he gruff? Does he just non-stop talk? And get a sense from someone who knows the person. So, that's the kind of work I do pre-interview, and then, I feel more comfortable going into it.
Well, you just heard it from one of the best in the country. That's best practice right there. I'll give you a quick example. So yesterday I had the former chief executive of Nike Australia in here. He'd worked all through Europe and the Americas. And as we were talking, it just came to me to find out who the most interesting sports person he'd worked with. And it wasn't my show. I'm just here, manning the panel.
Yeah.
And I just said at the end of the recording, I said, look, can I just ask one question? He said, yeah, what's that? I said, who's the most interesting sports star you went? And obviously the host went, put it in, let's put it in.
Great.
And it just so happened he worked with Jordan, he had Kathy Freeman, but he had a great story to tell about Michael Schumacher. So,
right.
That's just lends itself again to just doing a bit of research around who you're talking to.
All you did then was express your curiosity.
Correct.
Right? So if you are interviewing, you have to be curious, and you have to, and then in the back of my mind, the other thing I do is ask myself, what would my listeners want to hear? Because generally I think what I ask is what my listeners want to hear.
And that's perfect.
Yeah. So, okay. So good. So good prep. Any other sort of I love the idea of sending out a headset.
I thought that was
and
really
cool. Yeah. Because that's very, it is hard to control, with guests who often I'm interviewing people who haven't been interviewed a lot. And, and I do send them a link. I have a little link on my website that sort of says, to ensure best audio quality, please wear headphones, because don't use hands-free speakers, because that'll feed back in and I'll hear myself.
And it's not up to them.
No,
really.
It's not.
It is really up to you to make sure that the audio coming from their end is up to scratch. Because how many times has it happened where they've got no headset, they're talking to their computer, you can hear the fan of the computer in the background, and it's just not nice to listen to.
No,
it's not good for the listener either.
Any other pre-production tips?
No, really for me, it was all about going that extra mile when it comes to prepping your guests. Mm-hmm. And even it could be stuff like, mic technique, just going through stuff that we probably take for granted, being in it day in, day out, but just coaching your guest, I suppose.
Righto.
Just, talk 3 fingers away from the mic, or explain how the mic works. Depends on if it, let's not get too technical, if it's dynamic or, whatever it may be.
Yes.
But yeah, just little things like that.
Was there any discussion around format of shows? Because we talked a lot about interviews here, but there's one-on-one, there's just a co-hosts having a bit of banter, there's a listener question format, there's what I call the soapbox format, where you just get up and express opinions. There's a lot of different formats. Was there anything around that, or not really?
Not that I sat in on. And
because I don't want people going straight to interviews. Interviews is just the sort of default. I'm going to do a podcast and it's going to be interview-based. We both do that, but it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. There are other ways of structuring.
I sat in on the ESPN panel where they talk. So if you're a sports fan, you would have heard of the 30 for 30 series. Mm-hmm. And the producer was talking about that. So that's an audio story. And it was talking about the former owner of the LA Clippers. But it actually took her 3 years to create. Yeah. And it was really interesting to kind of just sit in and hear the story of how long and the journey and the trust that they had to build. So, that's a different style of podcast altogether. That's that, audio story style, which is big, and that's that crime.
True crime do it a lot. In fact, I had a guest a few months ago, Catherine Maslin, who's a naturopath. She's put together an audio series on gut health, and they are stories. And, anyone who I speak to who puts together audio stories or these audio documentaries, 30 minutes of a 30-minute episode has generally got hours and hours and
sound
hours.
Design.
Yeah.
Sound design's huge.
Of tape and sound design.
All that stuff.
Yeah, okay. Coops, let's move into production. What do we learn? Any aha moments around the actual production of an episode?
Other than what I touched on earlier with Squadcast, that was the biggest aha moment for me. The fact that it's built specifically for podcasters. And this is more, once again, about audio quality. I think, we should be focusing on that because there's so many people podcasting. If the audio quality is poor, I switch off.
Yep.
So, I think have a look at it.
There is no excuse because, I think, again, podcasters, we listen to podcasts when we're driving in a train, walking the dog, at the gym, in a cafe, and we are competing with ambient noise. So our audio production has to be spot on. And as you say, there are so many podcasts coming online these days that one point of difference is the quality. And I don't just mean the audio quality, but even the sound design, the use of music beds, the way, the beat of a podcast where, I'm doing the show for American Express at the moment called Idea Exchange. And one of the things that I've made a point of with my editor, James, is to punctuate certain points with maybe a silence or a little music bed that kind of fades up. And then that's a little gear change where we know, okay, that's the end of a particular discussion. A reset. Yep. We're moving into a new discussion, and things like that take us into a more professional land, which is good given all these commercial big networks are getting on board podcasting.
Another small point that I kind of picked up on is giving your audience 3 takeaways from each episode, which can be difficult, right? But if you can focus on that,
be difficult?
Well, it depends on the subject matter, I think. But if you, in your mind, when you're prepping for your show, if you can think of, that's something I'd like to know. I wonder if my audience would feel the same.
Yep.
And that was another one of the kind of tips that we got from the keynote. I forgot who mentioned that, but I thought, I've never thought about it like that because you generally just go in, I want to get the interview done, I've got my questions outlined. But I never think, and you do this well, Tim, you've got your takeaways.
Top 3 attention grabbers.
Well, how do you do that? So is that something you think about before you do your interview?
No, I know that I've got to get top 3.
Right.
And as my guest is talking and they say something, I actually write. I have a little section of my notepad in front of me where I do write. That grabbed my attention. I'll write it down. So when it's time to write the show notes and time to do the wrap up, I just go straight to them.
I'll share a story. I remember listening to your Rand Fishkin podcast where I literally stopped the car, pulled over, turned the podcast off so I could go into the notes because it's talking about SEO. So I'm sure plenty of people who listen to your podcast who are podcasters have had that pull over for a minute and take a note. Yeah. So that's that takeaway, that you focus on 1, 2, but the idea was 3, but I think 2 would be good enough.
Yeah, just the learnings. And okay, so production-wise, we'll come to show notes because that's really post-production. Yeah. Anything else? I guess what production is the Achilles heel of many podcasters. Again, we're lucky to be in the studio here at RadioHub. My favourite form of interview is face-to-face. Squadcast might be awesome. It might have video. It might have good quality audio. Nothing beats a face-to-face interview. Hard to do. Can be expensive. Not everyone can afford to travel face-to-face with and see their guests, but it's a better dynamic for sure.
Well, you're going overseas soon.
Yes.
You've just bought some gear.
Yeah.
It's not a big investment, was it?
No, I'm actually, and I've risked it. I haven't tried it out. I bought it sight unseen.
I have, and it works. I know it works.
Good. So I won't say what it is yet until I actually test it out because I won't. It's road gear, so it's going to be good. Yeah. It actually works with my iPhone, so I'm not having to carry additional hardware, and the rest will be kind of I'm a little bit nervous, but we'll be right.
I did learn one thing from one of your interviews.
Here we go.
And it's
one thing.
Well,
did you hear what you just said?
No, from a technical aspect.
Okay.
When it comes to the lav mic, depending on what the person's wearing, a bit of tape or blue tack underneath the mic to stop and actually tape the cord.
The cord.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Because it rustles.
It just rustles. So you can tape the cord to your clothing and just roll a bit of tape so it sticks to your collar. Yeah. And then you can put your microphone on that.
These are all, these are the little 1%ers that lead to an infinitely better outcome. And that old saying 1 + 1 = 11, this is where it's coming into play because, again, and I'm thinking about the small business owner listening to this who's thinking of going off and doing a podcast or a YouTube channel. Yep. What we're talking about here applies just as equally to video. It's getting these little 1%ers right. And I can tell you, you and I don't come from a media background.
No. Long way away.
I mean, you've got a great head for podcasting.
I sure do.
But the reality
Thanks,
is...
Robert Redford.
Is that Robert Redford back in the day or now?
Oh, yeah, now.
Yeah, thanks. But the reality is you do need to study a lot of what the media does if you are going to podcast. And, I have certain interviewers that I just love to watch. I go back on YouTube and watch them, or if they're current day, listen to them and just look at how they go about it. And they may be both TV and radio interviewers, but we can learn a lot from doing things like that.
And you learn by making mistakes.
Correct.
Right?
So let's talk post-production. So we've now produced an episode and it's time to get it out there. Aha moments from Podcast Movement.
They started talking about a platform called Descript.com. Haven't used it yet once again. I've sent an email to the CEO to have the one I want you to, because I am going to use these software platforms.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I want to be taught the right way.
Mm-hmm. What's it do?
So many of us are familiar with, you get your MP3 file, WAV format, whatever it may be, and we upload it to a service to transcribe.
Mm-hmm.
That Descript is one of those. But what it also does is it includes the WAV file at the bottom. So as it's transcribing, if there's a segment of the interview where you're reading it and you don't want to use it, you just highlight it, press delete, and it removes it from the audio track.
Removes it from the document and from the audio track.
Correct.
Jeez, that's clever.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
It's a robot transcription service.
It's AI.
I'm using one too. I use Trent, and it's
so do I.
Probably 85%.
Yeah. So they said it's 95. I would probably say 85. Once you get that sorted. But I think I edit with my eyes. So when you do edit, depending on what DAW you use, you can actually tell when there's an or someone's studying. So you know how to highlight that. This way, you're actually doing two jobs at once. So you're actually transcribing. Now, there's going to be words that aren't right and whatnot. But if there's something that you don't want to use, and particularly when you're working for a client and they want to move questions around, and that's the other beauty of it, you can highlight a whole passage, put that somewhere else, and it moves the audio as well. So this question this discussion we're having right now, we can put it to the back, to the front, whatever it may be. So I thought that was a bit of a game changer. Still want to challenge it on how it actually makes the cut, because we've got noise floor, or the ambient noise when we're not talking.
Yes.
How that looks from a listener's perspective.
Mate, there wouldn't be too many episodes you do when it's like quiet like that.
Yeah, that's right.
You're pretty good at filling the gaps. You and I both are. I don't mind a bit of silence though. There is a way, it can be very well used to punctuate a point and before one moves on.
I used to have it written on the board. It was a quote by Richie Benno: engage the brain before opening one's mouth.
I love it.
So we know you get excited during an interview and you go, and what else happened? Tell me more.
Yeah.
And they don't finish what they were saying. So I think that's a huge tip for anyone starting out, is to listen, and listen more.
Well, full disclosure here, I did an interview about a year ago or a year and a half ago with Richard Stubbs, the well-known Australian comedian, radio host. In fact, in my eyes, one of the better interviewers in Australia. And I got Stubbsy in. I saw him at a comedy night one night. I went up to him, told him what I did and whether he'd come in. And I said, the reason I want you to come in is I think you're a great interviewer, and I'd like you to come in and I'd like to interview you, but I want you to treat it as a bit of a class. I'm looking for constructive criticism is basically what I said. And so as I'm interviewing him, I gave him permission to pull me up on things. And his best advice to me was, you need to listen more. And I think I've taken that on, and just pausing before speaking and thinking about what the next question really is. And his other great bit of advice was, lead with your best stuff. Don't keep your powder dry.
Okay.
That was a really good interview. I enjoyed that one. Okay, so now one of the things you are very good at, Coops, in terms of post-production is social media. I reckon you have nailed it for Roosters Radio and for the other clients. I guess you're applying those learnings to businesses whose podcasts you are producing. Maybe take us through a typical social media campaign for one episode. How do you push it out?
So we try to have a rule of thumb that there's probably 10 individual bits of content that you can repurpose per episode. So you've got your audiograms. Now, there's a couple of different companies that do audiograms. It's basically a clip of the interview. It can be, a minute long, 30 seconds long. You put some artwork behind it, and it becomes an MP4 in actual fact. So it helps with the algorithms in Facebook and Twitter also. So
I've seen your audiograms, mainly on Insta.
We put video behind it. And I'm not going to give away the secret herbs and spices there because that's what keeps us at the top. But
geez, thanks for that.
It layers, so you can layer the content.
Yes.
So you can put your artwork, you can put your branding. We always put the badges to where you can listen. So it's always Apple, Google, Spotify, and then you've got the clip. You can caption it, and it's
mainly Insta or Facey as well.
Both.
Mm-hmm.
So I give that back to the client for them to do with it what they choose.
Now, the upside of these audiograms, two things. They look pretty specky. Yeah. They look really nice, but it also allows the person to listen to the show within their social media platform, which, A, is useful for them, and that's got to be the most important thing, but also Insta and Facey love that because you're not suggesting, hey, time to leave Instagram or Facebook and head off to my website.
So as long as the podcast has its own Instagram page,
yes,
and you got the link in the bio, I always use something along the lines of new episode here, and obviously it's a clip with a quote. To listen to full episode, click link in bio, and that'll take you straight to that episode.
How long is a clip?
The most I'll do is a minute. Mm-hmm. So they being the experts, say a minute 30 is about as much time as people can engage in a video. So I kind of go a little bit below that, right. But I don't know if 30 seconds is quite enough. So I try to find something that is quite, poignant, I suppose, and someone go, oh, that's interesting, I want to listen to the rest of it.
Big word, poignant for you.
Yeah.
Would you use that?
Mate, I went to a private school. It's hard to tell.
Tell me, okay, audiograms, what else do you do with an episode after you put it out?
Always write a post, so we get the transcription and then we'll write a content piece on it, and also which will then steer the audience back to the podcast.
Where do you put that?
Well, we put some on our webpage.
Once again, like a blog post?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, each client's different. But if it was a RadioHub show, for example,
yes.
if it was our show, we would do an audiogram. We'd probably do a little bit of video. That's probably one of the things we learnt from the States. We'll write a small article. And the next part of that, I suppose, is trying to get your fans involved in it too. So getting them to share it and getting their involvement.
So what's the trick to that? I don't have a huge amount of success with that. I always get a little shiver up my spine when I see that someone's shared an episode.
Right. So if I go back to one of my big 3 aha moments, there was a discussion on leverage your audience to grow your show. And this is something I have not done. And what they talked about is engaging with your fans. So you know how many true fans you have. Mm-hmm. And I actually did a case study on this last week where we used the video. I came back so full of ideas. I went, let's just test it all on Roosters Radio. So we got the camera out, we did the stream. But I went through the Facebook page and said, if you've got a question, the player's name was Luke Keary. I said, if you've got a question it was Angus Graham. I said, if you've got a question for Angus, let us know. And the best questions we'll put on this week's show. And one of the questions that came back was asking him about his charity. Now, I had no idea that he run this charity for Indigenous kids up in Arnhem Land. And once we had that question, well, then the whole interview changed. So, I said...
And you wouldn't have got that if you hadn't reached out to your fans.
But then we also commented, so I got a great question from Ben Collison. He wants to know a little bit more about your charity, First Peoples Project. And we talked about that for about 5 to 10 minutes. And it just changed the whole direction of the discussion. It wasn't about footy anymore. It was about the great work he's doing, trying to inspire young Indigenous kids in Arnhem, and the story behind that was interesting as well. So that was a really good way of kind of testing that model.
So I got to understand that the video that you did with the player was prior to the interview.
So we put out on Facebook, we said, on this week's show, we're talking to Player X. So you go on your social page, you say, this week I'm talking to Cooper Seal from RadioHub about all things podcast movement. If there's something you want to know about that event, put a question in our comments below.
Got it. And that's a day's out. So that's going to allow you to prep.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Yep.
So, that was good. Also, and you'd have experience in this, is having one-to-one interactions with your fans. So and getting feedback. So if someone says, Tim, I listened to that show you did with Cooper Silk, he's an imbecile, or or whatever. Or, tell me more about this.
Yeah, don't predict the future.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm going off early here, right? But getting feedback and finding out what they liked about the show, what they didn't, and you can structure your show around that. So I'm guilty of never really giving much love back to the fans. We get the same numbers and we've been doing that podcast for 6 years, but we never kind of give them back. You said something really interesting before about that behind the scenes look. So there's a bit of that as well. So, there's heaps of things you can try. They're not all going to work, but at least give it a crack.
Was there any discussion at Podcast Movement around doing live episodes?
Once again, did that last week too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Where? At
East Leagues Club. So I just made the Roosters the focal point and just said, because it's our show, we can do pretty much what we want within reason. And it was the stories we got were amazing. The feedback was positive, and if they make it to the grand final, I was speaking to the head of the East Group yesterday, we'll be back there grand final.
That's awesome.
to do another live show.
So what did that look like? You rolled up to a game on the weekend?
So the game was, the kickoff was at 7:50. We started our show at 6:50. So an hour before the kickoff. And I had four former players, which we just rang and said, look, we're going to do this show. Bought them a feed at the club and give them a couple of beers to loosen them up.
They're simple blokes.
And then the stories, the great stories from the 80s and the 70s.
So what did you do? Just set up in a lounge? You had a bit of equipment?
We set up at the club. Yep. So obviously Rugby League, we have leagues clubs where the poker machines are, but they also have big screen TVs and rooms where people go to watch the footy. So we set up 4 chairs or 5 chairs. I bought the mixer, took some speakers, set it up, and then we streamed it, and then we recorded as well. So we've got bonus content.
Yep.
So it's not stuff that you're going to put out as part of your weekly consistent release, but you go, hey guys, by the way, here's some bonus content where we talked about all the good stories from the 70s and 80s.
So you did a live stream of that on Facebook Live?
Yep.
Okay, you've recorded that. That's an episode that's going to come out or is already out?
It'll come out this weekend because we're building up into the finals.
Did you have an audience? You have actually people sitting in front of you?
We had about 60 to 100 people sitting there, and by the time the footy started, the place was full.
What did that do for you as the host? Did it give you a more positive energy, or did it scare the pants off you?
It made me want to do more of them.
Right.
So you could do this with whatever you do, be it the Amex stuff. It's just an open forum. But the other thing, we got fans to get involved as well. So if you've got a question for Player X, come up here, and we got some great questions.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it goes back to giving the fans a bit of ownership of your show.
Okay. So let's get back into post-break. You said there were 10 pieces of content that you put out for every episode. You've talked about audiograms. You've talked about Facebook Lives. What else are you doing?
Well, there's the article. There's a quote.
Yeah.
There's a
social media posters.
Yeah. So, you might use 5 individual. So you got your video, you got your audiograms, you got an image with a quote that you've been doing that for years. So you get 2 of them out a week. Yep. There's your 10 pieces. Do you have an email list? No,
you don't.
Well, we do for the Roosters, but remember we're a production facility, so we don't own their audience. Have
they got an email list?
Some do, some don't.
Do the Roosters email episodes out to their members?
It goes on their website, and it does. It goes out via a newsletter. So the other thing as well is the EDM. So depending on what host you use, and depending on who you use to send out your emails, if it's MailChimp or whoever it may be, you can embed your media player in your EDM, and then your audience can listen that way. For people who don't know what a podcast is, of which there's still plenty of them.
Mate, there is. Well, I was saying this to someone last night. I think if you walk out on the street these days and ask 100 people, have you heard of a podcast? I'm going to say probably 90 out of 100 are going to say yes.
I've got the statistic. The number's 83%.
There you go. So, but that's not much of it. That's not a very useful question. It's a vast improvement on 2 years ago, when I reckon that number would have been closer to 50. But it's great. 83% of people know what a podcast is. Do you listen? Have you listened to a podcast?
30%.
That's a big drop.
30%.
And then there's the next question: how often do you listen to a podcast? Do you listen to a podcast once a week? Now we're down to bloody 10%. Yeah. So I get a little bit disheartened by this, Coops, but I also see it as just a massive upside. The bar is so low. And again, speaking on behalf of small business owners who are thinking, the ship's already left the shore, it's too late to podcast, mate. It is so, I mean, I've been doing it for 10 years, you've been doing it for years. We just happen to be very early and we're operating in prehistoric times when it's like, no one was listening and we were just doing it because we loved it. Now we know that people are listening. They're a little bit easier to get hold of, but the potential audience, mate, it's huge.
One quick hack for that, and I actually did it yesterday. So the client came in with his guest never listened to a podcast. It's this simple. Give us a look at your phone. Take their phone.
I know.
Put them to put their code in. Now, whatever, if it's an iOS, you go to the Apple Podcasts, click the button, and whatever the podcast is, type it in, hit subscribe, and then you got a new listener. It's that simple.
I say that at the end of every one of these shows is where I just go, you really have to walk up and down the street, grab people's phones and actually subscribe on their behalf or hop in their car and do the same, because it is an unfortunate aspect of this medium that we are a part of. But that'll slowly change. I feel like it's slowly change. But just by the way, was there a discussion? We talk a lot about iTunes and the whole Apple space is, where to find your podcast. I use Pocket Cast actually as my app of choice, which is both Android and iOS. Was there discussion around Android phone users as to what app they're using? Are they using Stitcher? Because Google Play in Australia...
I think you'll find in the next 18 months to 2 years, Google will put a lot more energy and emphasis on the podcast platform. As I said, I wasn't available for their keynote, but I will watch it.
Too busy for Google.
Yeah, well, it just didn't fit in with what I wanted to learn.
They've taken notes.
The discussion, there was a lot of talk about Google at the event. Just the fact that their presence, them and Spotify, there's a lot of talk, just the fact that they were there. It was their first time at the event.
I'm assuming Apple was there.
I can't think of seeing them with a stand.
That's really interesting.
They would have.
So, see, I get frustrated by Apple.
So the thing was, obviously Google and Spotify had spent a lot of money on their setup. It was where you walked in the door, Google on the right,
who were
Spotify
bigger?
were in
Just
front
out
of
of interest, who were the bigger?
Spotify. Spotify's was like a cabana. Look, you could have been on the beach. They had palm trees. They were making coffees.
Cabana.
Yeah.
Da-da-da. You should play that. Yeah, thanks for not. You keep talking about it. You're waiting for me to keep singing. Interesting, because I have a view. I'm just going to get myself into trouble here, but Apple aren't listening anyway. I'm very grateful to Apple for what they've done to podcasting to date. They've got us to where we are. We look at the ladder there to see who's ranking how and where, and they have been the big podcast daddy of them all. I don't reckon they've given the medium a lot of love over the years. However, from what I understand, it's a bit of a two-edged sword, because if they do give it a lot of love, it may become a bit of a Facebook thing where they're going to ask us to boost our episodes in order, pay to play almost. And right now I don't really want to do that because I'm not seeing a lot of love coming from Apple. My other personal frustration with Apple is very ego-driven, but you know how they have the banners going across the top of iTunes promoting podcasts. I've never had one. 10 years, I have never had one.
I can help you there.
Stop it.
Stop it,
mate. Do not promise what you can't deliver. Now here's my gripe. It hurts my ego that, I've done so many podcasts and still haven't cracked a big banner on the Apple iTunes store. I would love to see that.
There's a form you have to fill a form.
Hang on. Okay, well, you're going to help me with that. The ones that get it, they're all the big names. Yep. And I get that, they've got to do that. But geez, give this podcasting primarily is a bespoke, independent medium. Has been. We're now being run over by the big guys, and I get it, and they've seen the value in it, and there's a lot to be learnt and weight to be put on that. But so Apple have been a little bit disappointing in my eyes. The other thing is that there is going to be a big brand come over the top. I feel like there's the swells building right now, and it's going to be a Spotify or a Google, or maybe like in the car industry, there's the Fords and the Holdens and the Toyotas of the world, but then all of a sudden this unknown brand Tesla comes in over the top, and they are bespoke electric cars. And I just feel like something like that's going to happen in the podcast industry, where a brand dedicated to podcasts will appear and take over.
The latest numbers for Spotify is 6%, and I think Apple was around 80 for the consumption, and I think Google was around 3. So there's a lot of room to move there. I think you see that Spotify buying up more shows, more content. So I think there's going to be a big play there. And look, I've got no crystal ball, but the other one too worth mentioning is maybe Facebook. There was a couple of little talks just, you know, on the floor where everyone's networking, you know, who's doing what. So
I'd like to see Spotify win. Spotify, are they still hand curating their content? Because I know that when I got on Spotify about maybe 18 months ago, 12 months ago, and they were hand picking.
Yeah, I don't think so. And another one worth mentioning, I think, is iHeartRadio.
Oh, yeah. I never quite understood iHeartRadio.
Yeah, well, it's big in the States. It's huge in the States.
Yeah, okay. And then what about podcast networks? I mean, they're popping up everywhere.
There's a million of them. Honestly, we could do a whole show on podcast networks. There's in
Give
Europe.
me what's your top learning there? Create one?
I'm a pick and stick kind of guy.
Yeah.
You know, we use Omni only because we're Australian. I've got a great relationship with Sharon and the team.
But Omni's
is now owned by Triton.
That's not a network.
Oh, sorry, networks.
Yeah. You just had a moment then, mate.
Yeah.
You just completely faded. Like you just.
I did. So networks.
So something like, you know, there's Mamma Mia in Australia. There's Podcast One. There is.
I don't listen to them.
I'm not loyal to a network. But when I see that a show's part of a network, part of me thinks, oh, maybe it's better than a show that isn't. But that's flawed thinking. So I know that those who own networks are making a bit of dough because from an advertiser's point of view.
That's where the money is.
Yeah.
Because they sell per download and the CPM's whatever, 25, 30 bucks per 1,000 downloads. So, you know, a huge podcast, you know, teaches Petters getting $1 million.
I noticed one of the streams was monetization. Did you learn anything from that, or did you choose not to go to that as well?
I went to one of the keynotes there, and there's actually a fund. So there's a venture capital mob that will actually invest in you. It's not here in Australia yet. It's simply called Pod Fund, and they're bankrolling a couple of different independents in the States. Met the guy who's got the cash.
Yeah.
And just introduced myself, said, you know, we're a long way away, but you know, wouldn't mind a bit of your hard earned. And he kind of laughed at me and walked away.
Yeah, correct.
No, but he was pretty cool. And he just said, look, it's a growing market. What you need to realise, it's a growing market. And I think as independents, once again, to be able to compete with these big budgets, you know, with lots of people involved, you need a bit of help. Because I know from our experience, we're a team of, there's myself, you know, I've got a studio manager, I've got a couple of editors, and we've got our digital, so it's like 8 people. If you're going into that audio story, you need more producers, you need sound design, you need, you know, it takes time to create that sound. You can't do that with less than, I dare say, 25K or whatever. So, I mean, who's got that kind of money? So you need help. So, yeah, Pod Fund was the organisation, had a bit of a chat about that. They also talked about planning in your process and budgeting.
You've shared a lot of aha moments. There's been a lot of learnings. If I was to summarise, I'd say that I'm going to just say Australian podcasters, because we're so far away, we need to pick up our game. We don't become complacent. It's very exciting because it's early days. The technology's improving. I don't know whether it's getting any easier. Things like Squadcast, that's easy. I've seen the interface and that's easy. I mean, some of the technology around going to do live stuff, that still seems hard. I'll tell you when I get back from London, see whether my little simple setup does work. I'm excited to test it. But I think we are in exciting days. Was there any kind of little fun asides that happened at Podcast Movement?
Well, there was a drink on every night. I got drunk for 4 days.
Unlike you?
Yeah.
Well, you've been off the gas for a while, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I am now.
Yeah.
No, but from a networking perspective, that it was really good, and you didn't have to be on the floor. You could just be walking around the halls and meet people from all over the world. You know, from different levels, from tech companies to just people just having a crack. I met a guy who does a podcast about horses. You know, just different stuff, and that's really interesting. So, it's definitely worth it. Worth attending.
Going to go next year?
They're doing one in February, and then they're doing the big one is in Dallas, I think, next August.
What are they doing in February?
It's kind of a more smaller bespoke one in LA.
Okay. You going?
Not sure. I'll definitely go to Dallas.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing too is it's not really a B2B. So for business podcasters, you know, like yourself, it's hard to leverage off that. I suppose finding guests to interview. For me, it was more about trying to learn what the experts in the States are doing.
Yeah.
And, not reinvent the wheel, just kind of learn from them and try and, like I said earlier, particularly in stuff like just interview process and stuff like that.
We're in the RadioHub studios right now. Do you feel, and you've spent a lot of time, this is the best podcast setup outside of going to a radio station or, these fancy big audio studios which are set up to do radio ads and voiceovers and all that. You are here to help podcasters. Yep. Do you feel like you're heading in the right direction?
Yeah, I really do.
It's good, mate.
Yeah.
Good on you.
And just, you asked me a question before about that one key point, I guess, and I suppose from all my learnings, the big one for me is when it comes to marketing a podcast, there's no magic bullet. You just got to try everything. So if it means, throwing a bit of money at a Facebook campaign, give it a shot. Try video, try live, try everything.
Yeah.
Change your artwork colours. It can be anything. Just give it a shot. But start transcribing your shows because of the Google impact in the SEO and the way they're going to index podcasts. Definitely make sure you transcribe and include detailed show notes.
What are you listening to at the moment?
Right now, on the way to here, I listen to two.
The Small Business Big Marketing Show.
No, I do listen to your show. I do. Listen, I'll give you my top three.
Yeah.
Small Business Big Marketing.
Episodes.
Number 1, Rand Fishkin.
Awesome.
Number 2, the ice cream bloke, Scotty Kilmartin. And number 3, Wally from the Chicken Shop.
Oh, he was awesome.
He was a beauty.
He was awesome.
He was a beauty.
He's larger than life. While you're looking, because Coop right now is opening up his pocket cast to see what he's listening to, but those episodes, what I can tell you about Rand Fishkin, one of the most popular episodes I've ever done. He has a massive following anyway, so that was awesome when he could promote that episode. But what he went through was like the ultimate SEO tips. What are you showing me there?
Yeah, there's you. There's your big mate.
Look at you.
Being on purpose is a masseur to the stars.
There you go. Most recent episode. So what are you listening to?
All right. So one of my favourites is called Art of Manliness. It's not it's not what it actually sounds like.
Yeah, no, I listen to that.
I've been listening to a short podcast called Podcast Accelerator with Mark Asquith. He's an English guy.
A podcast about podcasting?
Yeah. And then I've also, big fan of Roosters Radio. Listen to that every week. No Limitations.
That is with Mark Boris? No,
it's done here, but it's a guy called Greg Robinson. He talks to CEOs.
Oh yes,
and I've actually become a better business operator because of it, because they actually talk about the mistakes that they've made.
Awesome.
And they're talking about multi-billion-dollar companies here, and you just kind of go, wow. And truth be known, most of them started out from humble beginnings.
Correct.
So it's worth having a listen to.
I think you're going to ask me what I listen to. Stop it.
Tim, what do you listen to?
I am absolutely loving the Ron Burgundy podcast.
I've seen it, I haven't heard it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm a massive fan of Anchorman, right?
Same.
And I love Will Ferrell. And so Will has continued the Ron Burgundy character by giving him his own show. And I just think it's some of the funniest audio out there at the moment. I do not listen to it in a plane, because you'll be that guy who goes, back to it. I'm loving Sizzletown, Tony Martin's Sizzletown. I love comedy. The production values on that are completely off the charts. If you're going to listen to that podcast, listen to it on a really nice set of Bose noise cancelling headsets, because I know the effort those guys put into it. And I've really been enjoying a podcast that's no longer being produced. It's called the Nick Broadhurst Show. And Nick was he was one of the lead singers of Sneaky Sound System back in the day. And
they were big up here in Sydney.
They were very big up here in Sydney. And he's now had a podcast. He finished after about 100 episodes, but basically talking about being a man and the various aspects of it. And it was a really beautiful podcast. He talked about everything from health and well-being to diet to masculinity to, sexual practices and everything. And it was just a really lovely show.
What about audiobooks? Because I've got into them recently too. Have you give the audiobook a test?
No. You mate, stick to podcasts. Audiobooks.
I listen to podcasts all day.
Competition. No. Well, you can't read, so you have to read audio.
Exactly right.
So, look, one of the awesome things about podcasting, as we know, is there's a topic for everyone, and, it's incredible and may continue to grow. And I hope to be back here in 5 years' time saying, those lessons learned from podcast movement have been applied. And I can't believe I haven't been. I'm a bit embarrassed to say that I've never been to one, but maybe I'll see you in, where are we going? LA in February.
If we don't go to LA,
Texas.
we'll definitely go to Dallas.
Awesome.
Okay.
Bigger than Texas, mate. Coops, thank you. RadioHub.com.au would be a great place to go. There's examples of your work. There's the shows that you produce. But more importantly, if you're a business owner that wants to get going on podcasting and want to spend a bit of dough at it, which is probably a good idea. I don't like the idea of a business owner who wants to podcast try to do it all. So cash flow allowing, come and spend a bit of dough at Radio Hub. Coops will take you through it with his suite of editors and producers. Love your work, buddy. Thanks for everything you've done so far.
Thank you very much, Tim. Let's do a live stream.
Well, there you go. Fellow podcaster Cooper Silk, whose Roosters Radio podcast is a must listen to if you're into that very unusual sport they call Rugby League. Or if you're not and you just want a podcast produced, then do check out Coops at radiohub.com.au. Righto, here's what grabbed my attention from that chat.
Attention grabber number 1. Us independent podcasters must avoid becoming complacent now that the big media companies are playing in our space. You know I have strong feelings about this if you have listened to my show for a while. I love podcasting. It's independent. It's bespoke. And, you know, the big guys are always going to come in. Radio programs are always going to get repurposed into podcasts and all that stuff. But those guys have got really big budgets. They've got the talent pool. They've got the resources. I get all that. But let's just not, you know, if you are an independent podcast, if you're a business owner and you're podcasting or thinking about it, do it. Don't become complacent. Aim to create world's best. Attention grabber number 2. There's plenty more we could be doing post-production to get each episode listened to by as many people as possible. I'm guilty of this. I'm working with someone at the moment to put together a plan for 2020 so that I embrace certainly social media a lot more. I've spoken about this previously, but lots of different ways. You know, I had that episode a few weeks ago where we talked about how to get your video seen by as many people as possible. I think we shared 30 ideas. I think we can do the same with podcasting. So, yeah, post-production, get it out there, build your audience. Attention grabber number 3. If you're a business owner thinking of starting a podcast but concerned that it's too late, that there's already enough out there, then get over it. Your challenge is simply a creative one in ensuring yours is the best. It is still early days in the world of podcast.
That's what grabbed my attention. Whatever grabbed yours, big idea, small idea, be sure to block out some time and implement it.
Come on down. It's Timbo's Monster Prize Draw.
Yes, indeedly doodly. It's time to reward another motivated listener for taking some serious marketing action as a result of listening to this show. And today's winner is Chinese medicine practitioner Dr. Bianca Makuso of seedchinesemedicine.com. Now, Bianca has written me quite the email, but you know what? It's a really good email, and there's so many great learnings here for us in terms of ideas that she's learnt from this show that she's implemented with great success. So whilst I'm not going to read the entire email, it's a little bit longer than usual. Let me get it ready. Dear Tim, thank you so much for your podcast. I recently restarted my Chinese medicine practice after being on maternity leave for a year. I felt completely out of touch, so I figured I'd find a small business podcast while I refound my feet. I came across yours and was instantly hooked. I've binged listened to over 100 episodes in the last 6 months. I love you already, Bianca. You win. No, you can't win just for that. She goes on to say, I'm only working 4 hours a week because I want to spend time with my daughter. That's 4 hours seeing patients, but maybe 5 hours altogether, including admin work. Initially, I thought this was going to be so restrictive and that my business would have a cap as to how much I could bring in because I can only see so many patients in 4 hours. However, my business is now bigger than it was before I went on leave because of all the changes I've made thanks to your show. Oh, and here they are. Things I've implemented since listening to your podcast include niching down. It was terrifying because I didn't want to box myself in to only one type of treatment, but it's been a great decision. I'm now the specialist in cosmetics. I've also inadvertently become an expert in my field, and now other practitioners contact me for my opinion on cosmetic patients. This is also a touch point because I now have patients referred from other practitioners. Love it. Love a niche, an inch wide, a mile deep. Bianca, good work there. Next thing she's done, just getting things out there. When I returned from maternity leave, I wanted to redo my logo and my website, and on 4 hours a week, they were huge things and I didn't have the time. So I just went on to fiverr.com for my logo and got it done in 2 days and about 20 minutes of my time. Bang, just like that. Next thing, purchasing wholesale. I love this idea. I listened to your episode, Timbo, where that young boy discussed importing toys from China. That was Will Death, and reselling them. And I thought I could do that. So I went on to Alibaba and tried to find a wholesaler for a Chinese medicine cosmetic product. It was a steep learning curve, but in the end, well worth it. And I've just sold all my stock from my first order and have placed a second order for 3 times as much stock. Awesome. Next idea. I told you this was long. There's 3 more ideas. Seriously. Selling wholesale. Business to business was an aspect of business that I thought would never be open to me because I always thought my job was for patients, B2C, or B2P really. I now sell 80% of my stock to other practitioners, and it's the easiest income stream of my entire business. Bianca, you're a genius. What's this podcast you're listening to? Next idea, sharing valuable content in my social media. I've now almost completely stopped advertising in my social media posts, and I just offer valuable information and education. That's it. Be helpful. Once in a blue moon, I do a post for something like free shipping, but that's as advertising as I get. When I see patients at their appointments, I often find myself educating them on something and then being taken aback and saying, "Really? I had no idea." It's an awesome outcome from a patient. I realised if one patient doesn't know, it's likely that other current prospective patients also don't know. So I'll write a post about it. That's right. Get your content down on paper or video or audio. And these educational posts are the valuable ones where I get the most interaction, the most clicks, the most saves, the most forwards because they are valuable. Well, it's actually because they're helpful, Bianca. Last idea, reaching out to other small businesses. I've done a product swap with another small business on Instagram and it was a great experience. I contacted them to see if they wanted to partake in us sending each other our products and then doing a post about it, and the other small business owner was so enthusiastic. Brilliant. Working 4 hours a week is now something that I'm proud of instead of thinking that I'm making a huge mistake. I'm making more money now than I was when working 24 hours a week before my maternity leave, and that's an amazing feeling. Thank you so much, Timbo. Kind regards, Dr. Bianca Mancuso from seedchinesemedicine.com. Bianca, for being the action taker that you are, you have won a Flow Hive pollinator. That's worth $79. Boxing gloves from Fitness Enhancement, $40. Access to Jeff Anderson's video marketing course, $197. $50 Snackwise sample box. A range of Liar's non-alcoholic spirits, that's valued at over $500. $50 Sendor voucher. $100 voucher to buy some tradies undies. You get promoted on this show and a backlink in my show notes. And that is all for you because you have taken some serious marketing action. For everyone else listening who hasn't entered the Monster Prize Draw, go ahead. Tell me one idea. You don't have to be so verbose as Bianca was, although I did enjoy all those ideas. Send me one idea you've learned from this show and implemented, and what outcome it's had or what impact it's had on your business. And if I read it out on air, you win.
Before we wrap things up, just a reminder that you'll find hundreds more episodes full of ideas to grow that beautiful business of yours over at smallbusinessbigmarketing.com. If you're getting value from listening, and I reckon you are, because I think I've seen you around here before, then don't keep it a secret. Be sure to let other business owners know about it. Next week, we catch up with Abigail Forsyth, who's the creator of Keep Cup, the world's first barista standard reusable coffee cup. And she has got some very, very strong opinions, not only about marketing and business, but about sort of how we're managing the whole environmental thing. This podcast was presented by me, Timbo Reid, and produced by the wonderful Matt Dwyer. Until next week, thanks for tuning in. Now get out there and take action.